Hi everyone, my name is Maya Collins. I'm 31 years old. I live in a small town in Virginia, and until about 14 months ago, I genuinely believed that the worst day of my life had already happened and was behind me. I was wrong. The worst day, and then somehow astonishingly, the best day, both happened on the same afternoon, at my own wedding, in front of 200 people I had known and loved my entire life. And the person who caused all of it was my sister. I've been sitting on this story for over a year because honestly, for most of that time, I wasn't sure I could tell it without just falling apart. There's a version of this I tried to write down 6 months ago, and I got to the reception scene, and I had to close the laptop and go take a walk and not come back until the next day. But something shifted for me recently. My therapist, who I have been seeing for 3 years now, and who I would recommend to literally every person alive, she said something that stuck with me. She said that keeping a story inside yourself doesn't protect you from it. It just means you're carrying it alone. And she said that for people like me, people who spent most of their lives being quiet, being small, making themselves easy to overlook, telling our stories out loud is actually an act of reclamation. So here I am, reclaiming. Before I get into what happened that day, I need you to understand the full landscape of my family, because without it, the story is just drama. With it, the story is something else entirely. It's about years and silence, and one man who saw me clearly when no one else did. I am the older sister by 4 years. My name is Maya. My younger sister's name is Brielle, and from the time Brielle was old enough to walk into a room and command it, my family had a favorite. I want to be careful here, because I've done enough therapy now to be honest without being unfair. My parents are not monsters. I don't think they sat down one day and decided, consciously, that they would pour all their warmth and resources and attention into one daughter and leave the other to figure things out on her own. I don't think it was malicious. I think it was gravitational. Brielle was magnetic from birth, genuinely, naturally, breathtakingly so, and people just moved toward her the way plants move toward light, including my parents. She had our mother's dark curls, our father's green eyes, a laugh that started low and built into something that made strangers at the next table over smile. She was the kind of child that made other parents stop in the grocery store and say, "Oh, she is just something." And she was. I'm not rewriting history. I was the other one. I was quiet, bookish. I liked puzzles and plants and reading books that were too old for me, and asking questions about how things worked that my teachers sometimes weren't sure how to answer. I helped neighbors with their gardens. I checked out the same library book 4 times in a single summer because I couldn't afford to buy it, and I kept wanting to reread the ending. I was not an easy child to notice unless you were specifically looking. One person was always specifically looking. My grandfather, my dad's father. Everyone called him Grandpa Len, but his full name was Leonard Arthur Collins, and he was, without question, the most quietly extraordinary person I have ever known in my life. Grandpa Len was not a wealthy man in any flashy sense of the word. He grew up with almost nothing, dropped out of school at 16 to help support his family, spent a decade working double shifts at a manufacturing plant in Roanoke, and saved every dollar he could. He was not someone who talked much about himself. He was not someone who needed to be the center of anything. He just built. Quietly, carefully, over years. He built a life. When he was in his mid-30s, he bought a piece of land about 40 minutes outside of our hometown. 112 acres of Virginia countryside. Rolling hills, a creek along the western edge, a pond, some old outbuildings, a farmhouse in need of serious work. He paid cash, money he'd saved for almost a decade, and he called it his proudest purchase. Not because it was grand, because it was his. He spent the rest of his life tending that land with the same attention he gave everything else. Unhurried, steady, careful. Brielle, by the time she was old enough to have an opinion, called it the boring old farm. She came out there maybe 3 times during our childhood. She found the quiet uncomfortable and the lack of reliable Wi-Fi unacceptable, and she always seemed faintly put upon whenever the topic came up. I spent every summer there that my parents would allow. I helped Grandpa Len with the garden, the fences, the pond. I learned the names of every species of bird that came through that property. He taught me them one by one, with patience and a battered field guide, and 2 pairs of old binoculars that fogged up in the humidity. I learned which parts of the property flooded in heavy rain, and which stayed dry. I learned how the light moved across the hills at different times of day. I learned the creek's moods. More than any of that, I learned how to be still, how to observe, how to wait for things to reveal themselves. When I say Grandpa Len saw me, I mean it in a specific way. I don't mean he complimented me or praised me or built me up with words, though he did those things too. I mean he paid attention. He noticed when I was thinking hard about something. He asked what I was reading. He listened to my actual answers instead of waiting for me to finish so he could respond. For a child who had grown up largely invisible inside her own family, being truly seen by someone felt enormous. It was the difference between surviving and being nourished. He used to say, "Maya bird, the quiet ones are always watching, and the ones who are watching are always learning." He said it like it was the most valuable thing in the world to be. I believed him, because he meant it. When Grandpa Len got sick, really sick, the serious kind, in his late 70s, everything in my life adjusted around that fact. I was in my mid-20s by then. I had a job in property management, entry level, nothing glamorous, and a small apartment and a car that needed new brakes, and I rearranged all of it to be able to drive out to the property on weekends, to sit with him, to read to him when his eyes were too tired, to make sure he was eating. To do the things that needed doing around a property that a man in declining health could no longer do himself. My parents called. They came when they could, which was less often than any of us said out loud. Brielle sent a card, maybe 2 cards. I don't say this to condemn them. People handle illness differently, and the distance was real, but the arithmetic is what it is. I was there. Not because I expected anything from it, not even, honestly, because I was thinking about it strategically. I was there because Grandpa Len was the person who had always been there for me, and being present for the people who love you is not a transaction. It's just what you do. He passed away on a Tuesday morning in early March, when I was 26 years old. I was in the room. I held his hand. It was peaceful, which I will be grateful for my whole life. The grief hit me in waves for months. Some days were fine. Some days I'd be driving or folding laundry or standing in line at the drugstore, and something small would remind me of him. The sound of a cardinal, the smell of wet earth, and I'd have to pull myself together in a way that left me exhausted for hours. About 6 weeks after the funeral, his estate went through probate. His attorney, a quiet, careful man named Mr. Hartwell, who clearly understood what he was about to deliver, called me into his office separately from the rest of the family. He sat across from me with a folder and he said, "Your grandfather was very deliberate about his wishes, and I want you to know he updated this will 3 times in the last decade. Each time, his instructions regarding the property remained the same." He left me the land. All of it. The 112 acres, the farmhouse, the guest cottage, the pond, the outbuildings, every fence line and dirt path and bird-haunted corner of it. He also left me the contents of a savings account that he'd been quietly adding to for 30 years, that was considerably larger than I had any reason to expect. And he left a letter. Mr. Hartwell handed it to me in a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Grandpa Len's handwriting, careful, slightly shaky from the end of his life, but unmistakably his. I didn't open it in the office. I drove to the property, parked in the gravel drive, and opened it sitting in my car with the windows down and the March air coming through. I'm not going to share the full letter. Some things are only for you. But I will tell you what he said in the opening lines, because it matters to this story. He said, "Maya Bird, I have watched you your whole life, and I know that the people who are supposed to see you have not always seen you clearly. I want to do something about that. This land is my life's work, and I want it to be yours. Not because I felt sorry for you, because I believe in what you are going to build." I sat in that car for 45 minutes. I cried until I had nothing left. And then something settled in me, something that had been anxious and shifting my whole life. And for the first time I can remember, it went still. My family found out about the will the same day. My mother went quiet. Not the gentle, processing kind of quiet, the specific quiet of a woman who is angry and calculating her response. My father said, several times, that he thought there might have been some mistake, that he wasn't sure Grandpa Len had fully understood what he was signing. I let him say it. I knew there was no mistake. Mr. Hartwell had walked me through the documentation, 3 separate iterations of the will, each legally airtight, each witnessed and notarized, the most recent signed 18 months before Grandpa Len's death, when he was, by every legal and medical measure, fully competent. And then there was Brielle. She called me 2 days after the estate news became official. She went through every emotion in approximately 45 minutes of phone call. Shock, then tears, then something that was framed as concern, but was really a specific kind of anger. And then she landed, finally, on this. "He obviously felt sorry for you, Maya. He knew you needed it more. He was trying to be kind." I want to sit with that for a second, because it's so perfectly Brielle. The only framework she could find to explain our grandfather leaving something to me was pity. Because in her world, there was no version of events where I was simply chosen, valued, preferred, because I was Maya, and Maya didn't get chosen. I didn't argue. There was nothing to argue with. I just said I had to go, and I hung up, and I cried again. But this time, as I said, the tears were different. They were the tears of someone who has just been handed something true and beautiful, and is still figuring out what to do with it. And if you're wondering how I felt about getting a call like that, so close to losing someone I loved, I want you to sit with that too, just for a moment. Because that's what it was. And that's why this story matters. That is exactly why. Okay, fast forward 4 years. Stay with me because this is where everything connects. By the time I met Daniel, I had done something with Grandpa Len's land that I wasn't sure was possible, and wouldn't have been without those years of learning, of watching, of storing up patience like I was saving for something I couldn't name yet. I had turned it into a venue, a real one, not a "let's string some lights in the barn and hope for the best" situation. A fully licensed, professionally staffed, insured and permitted wedding and events venue with a general manager, a catering partnership, an events coordinator, and a website that had been featured in 2 regional bridal publications and 1 piece in a national lifestyle magazine. Harriet's Creek Estate, named after the creek that runs along the western edge of the property, which I always loved most. It took 3 years of weekends, a business loan that kept me up at night for 18 months, every saved dollar I had, every connection I'd made in property management, and more physical labor than I can honestly account for. I renovated the farmhouse myself where I could, and hired contractors for what I couldn't. I worked with a landscape architect to develop the grounds. I converted the largest outbuilding into an event pavilion with exposed timber beams and a wall of windows that looks out over the hills. I built a proper bridal suite in the guest cottage. I planted the gardens myself, in the same beds where Grandpa Len grew tomatoes, now full of dahlias and lavender and climbing roses. The first event we hosted was a 60th birthday party for a woman who had been referred to us by a real estate agent who'd driven past the property and asked Sandra for a card. That party went perfectly. The second event was a small wedding, 40 guests, on a Saturday in October. The couple cried through the whole ceremony. Their mothers cried. I stood at the back of the property and watched, and felt something so full and so enormous in my chest that I had to press my hand against my sternum to hold it. By the time I met Daniel 18 months later, we had a 16-month wait list and had been named one of the top 10 wedding venues in Virginia by a regional bridal guide. Sandra was running operations. I was still involved in every major decision, but I had a functioning team and a functioning business. I told Daniel about the venue on our third date. I wasn't sure why I waited. Habit, I think. The habit of not leading with my successes. He listened with this completely attentive expression, asked 3 very good questions about the renovation process, and then said, "Can I see it?" We drove out there on a Sunday afternoon. I walked him through the pavilion. I showed him the creek and the pond and the oak grove and the restored farmhouse. I showed him the bridal suite and the kitchen and the fire pit circle I'd had built in the clearing behind the main house. He stood at the edge of the pond for a long moment, looking out across the property, and then he said, "Your grandfather knew exactly what he was doing." I almost married him right there. He proposed 8 months later, on the front porch of the farmhouse, just the 2 of us, at dusk, with the creek sound in the background, and the Virginia hills going purple in the fading light. He had a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a simple oval sapphire, nothing dramatic, and he got down on one knee on the old porch boards and said, "I want to build things with you. Everything. For the rest of my life." I said yes before he finished the sentence. We were getting married at Harriet's Creek, obviously. There was never a question. Now here is where I need to tell you about the dress, because the dress is central to everything that comes next. I found it at a small vintage clothing boutique in Charlottesville called the Pearl Room, which I had driven past dozens of times and never stopped at because I was always on my way somewhere else. One Saturday in January, about 8 months before the wedding, I wasn't on my way anywhere in particular, and on a complete whim I pulled over and went in. The boutique owner was a woman in her 60s named Harriet, which I took as a sign, and she had the particular energy of someone who has spent decades surrounded by beautiful things and is genuinely joyful about all of them. The shop smelled like cedar and something floral and old paper in the best possible way. I wasn't looking for a wedding dress, I was just looking. But it was on the second rack, hanging between a beaded cocktail dress and a wool coat, and when I saw it, I stopped walking. Ivory. 1970s era construction. Delicate lace sleeves with a slightly scalloped edge. An A-line skirt that moved when you breathed near it. And along the neckline, almost too subtle to catch unless you were really looking, the most intricate hand-embroidered flowers I had ever seen in my life. Tiny. Perfect. Hours of work from someone's hands decades before I was born. Harriet saw me looking and lifted it off the rack and held it up and said, "This one has been waiting for the right person." I put it on in a changing room that was barely bigger than a closet, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I had absolutely no defenses against what happened next. I cried. Harriet cried. A woman I had never met who was browsing the accessories section said, from the other side of the curtain, "Oh, honey, I don't know what's happening in there, but I can feel it from out here." The dress cost $800. In the world of wedding dresses, which can routinely cost $3, $5, $10,000 or more, $800 is deeply modest. I knew this. I did not care. I bought it immediately and drove home with it on the back seat and spent the evening looking at it and feeling completely sure. I made one mistake. I told Brielle. I don't know why I do this. I've analyzed it in therapy more times than I can count. There's something in me, something old and stubborn and probably rooted in the child who kept hoping her sister would be different, that keeps trying, that keeps extending the information, the invitation, the small, vulnerable thing that is, here is something that matters to me. Here is a chance to be kind. She was not kind. $800? The silence that followed those 3 words contained more contempt than most people's most contemptuous speeches. Maya, you cannot be serious. People will think you couldn't afford anything better. I love it, I said. It's going to look cheap, she said, like something from a consignment store. It's vintage, I said. That's what people say when they mean old and used, she said. I didn't respond to that. I changed the subject. We ended the call. I closed my eyes and spent about 30 seconds being very quietly devastated, and then I made myself a cup of tea and looked at my dress hanging in the corner of my bedroom and said to it, out loud and to myself, "We're fine. We're perfect." Now, Brielle was the maid of honor. I know. Daniel's exact words when I told him were, "Okay, if that's what you want." In the very specific voice that meant, "I have concerns and I love you enough to let you be wrong about this." I asked her because she's my sister, because somewhere inside me the child who wanted her sister to see her had never fully given up, because I thought, maybe, on my wedding day, maybe this would be the moment she showed up for me. I need you to keep that hope in your mind as you hear what comes next, because I want you to understand what it cost. The wedding was scheduled for the second Saturday of October. Harriet's Creek in October is something that has to be experienced to be fully understood. The oak trees along the north end of the property turn amber and gold and a deep, burning red. The creek runs with more energy after the fall rains. The air has that particular quality that only exists in Virginia in autumn, cold and clean, and with the faintest smell of wood smoke from somewhere distant. The hills in the afternoon light look like a painting someone spent months on. I had been imagining our wedding in that setting for almost a year. I had been looking forward to that day with a fullness I don't have good words for. The morning of, I woke up at 6. The setup crew was already on the property. My team, people I trusted completely, led by Sandra, who is the kind of operational mind that makes everything look effortless. I had a cup of coffee on the farmhouse porch in the October cold, watching the string lights still on from the setup test the night before, and I felt something settle in my chest that I recognized as peace. Real peace, the kind you can't manufacture. My 2 best friends, Priya and Claudette, arrived by 7:30. Priya was doing my hair. Claudette was doing what Claudette always does at high-stakes events, which is arrive prepared for anything, quietly assess every potential problem in the vicinity, and communicate solely through meaningful looks and strategic placement of her 6-foot frame. Brielle arrived at 9. She arrived, I should say, already in full hair and makeup, which was not the plan. The bridesmaids were supposed to get ready together in the cottage. Brielle had hired her own stylist and arrived, as she described it, camera ready, which in practice meant she had been ready for 2 hours and spent them somewhere else, and joined us only when there was nothing left for her to actually help with. She swept in wearing her bridesmaid dress. And here is the first thing I want you to file away, because it becomes relevant. It was not the dusty rose I had ordered, and all 3 other bridesmaids were wearing. It was ivory. Not a subtle distinction. She was wearing an ivory dress to my wedding as a bridesmaid. They didn't have my size in the rose, she said before I could say anything. The ivory was literally the only option. It's the same cut. It's basically the same thing. Priya, who was doing my updo at the mirror, met my eyes in the reflection. I looked away. It's fine, I said, because I was not going to cry about a bridesmaid dress on my wedding morning. I had decided this before she even arrived. Brielle moved immediately to where my dress was hanging in its cloth garment bag on the back of the wardrobe door. She unzipped the bag with the very specific efficiency of someone who has already decided what they think and is confirming it. She looked at the dress for a long moment. She tilted her head slightly. Then she said, "Oh, Maya. Honey." 3 words. That tone. If you have never had a sibling who weaponizes a sympathetic tone to deliver contempt, I am genuinely happy for you. That tone means, I pity you. I know better. I am performing concern as a vehicle for my actual feeling, which is superiority. It's exactly what I wanted, I said. Of course it is, she said. And she zipped the bag back up and helped herself to the cheese platter without being asked, and spent the rest of the morning on her phone while Priya and Claudette and I finished getting ready. I want to tell you about putting the dress on. Priya zipped it up. Claudette stood back and was quiet for a second, and Claudette is never quiet. And then she said, "Maya," in a voice that had something broken and something proud in it simultaneously. Priya put a hand over her mouth. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror in the corner of the bridal suite. The ivory lace sat against my dark skin in a way that felt like it had been specifically chosen for this combination. The embroidery at the neckline caught the morning light from the window. My grandmother's pearl earrings were at my ears. Priya had put tiny white wildflowers from the property's garden into my updo. Actual flowers from Grandpa Len's land, and they looked like they'd grown there. I looked like myself, the truest, most distilled version of myself, the person I had been slowly becoming for 31 years. And for a moment, I just stood there and breathed and let it be real. Behind me in the mirror, I noticed Brielle glance up from her phone. She looked at me, a long, appraising look, and then back down at her screen without a word. I turned away from the mirror and said, "Okay, let's get married." The ceremony was at 2 o'clock in the oak grove at the northeast corner of the property. The aisle was a path of packed earth, covered with rose petals and fallen leaves, lined with hurricane lanterns. The guests were seated on simple wooden chairs, arranged so that everyone had a clear sight line to the natural arch of oak branches at the clearing center, where we'd strung white ribbon and dried florals. I walked with my father. He was holding my arm, and I could feel that he was nervous, which made me love him, and that he was proud, which made me feel complicated things I've spent a lot of time with in therapy. He whispered, before we rounded the corner and came into view of the guests, "You look beautiful, Maya. You really do." I said, "Thank you, Dad." And then I saw Daniel. He was standing at the front of the aisle in a charcoal suit and his grandmother's cufflinks that I had specifically asked him to wear, and he saw me at the exact moment I came into view, and he cried. He will deny this with complete conviction to anyone who asks, The photographs tell a different story. Claudette, stationed near the front, has a close-up that is one of the most human things I have ever seen, and I will treasure it until I die. I cried too, a little, which I had specifically told myself not to do. Priya, from her position in the bridesmaid line, mouthed at me, "I told you," which made me laugh, which made me cry more, which caused a small ripple of laughter through the guests, which somehow made the whole thing more perfect. We wrote our own vows. Daniel's took 7 minutes to deliver because he kept stopping. Mine took 5, for the same reason. The officiant, our college friend Marcus, who had been ordained specifically for this, and who took the responsibility with a seriousness that moved me, said afterward that in 4 years of officiating, he had never cried during a ceremony. He cried at ours. For 45 minutes, it was the most beautiful day of my life. And if you're watching this and thinking, so where does it go wrong? It goes wrong at the reception. Right in the middle of everything beautiful. Right when I was closest to simply having the day I deserved. The reception was in the main event pavilion. My team had executed everything perfectly. Thousands of small amber string lights overhead, long harvest tables with deep burgundy linens and brass candle holders, towering arrangements of dahlias and autumn foliage in shades of rust and gold and cream. The catering was extraordinary. The band was a 4-piece that had been playing weddings for 20 years and knew exactly when to be background and exactly when to be the whole room. 212 guests. Family, friends, colleagues, people who had known me my entire life, and people I'd met only recently through work. Sandra was on operational duty. She and I had pre-agreed. She managed the evening professionally. I was fully present as a bride, and if anything required my personal attention, she would come to Priya first. The first hour was everything. Daniel and I danced. His mother and I hugged for a long time without saying anything. My father gave a toast that was warm and genuinely funny, and made Daniel laugh so hard he had to put down his glass. The food was served. The room had the specific golden noise of 200 happy people, conversation and laughter, and the band underneath everything. Then came the maid of honor speech. Brielle stood at the microphone looking like someone who had been waiting for this moment since she arrived, and possibly since the day before. She was, I'll admit, commanding. She always is. She had the microphone the way some people have rooms, naturally, like it was made for her. She started well. She told a childhood story, one about us building a blanket fort in the living room during a thunderstorm when I was 8 and she was 4. That was actually sweet and true and made people smile. She made a small joke that worked. The room was warm and with her. And then she pivoted. "I have to be honest with you all," she said, with the specific conspiratorial warmth of someone who has decided that honesty is a socially acceptable wrapper for what they're about to say. Because I think honesty is what sisters are for. I felt Daniel's hand find mine under the table. When Maya told me she was wearing a vintage dress she found for $800, Brielle continued, I was genuinely worried. I thought, Maya, people are going to think you couldn't afford something better. I thought our girl was going to walk down the aisle and people were going to think she'd grabbed the first thing off a clearance rack. She paused. The laugh she'd expected didn't quite arrive. And then I saw the dress this morning, and I thought, okay, it's sweet. It has a lot of character. It's very Maya. A meaningful pause. Very modest. The room was doing something complicated. You could feel it. 200 people simultaneously processing what they had just heard, calculating whether it was a joke that hadn't landed or something else, waiting to see how the speaker resolved it. She raised her glass. I think what I'm trying to say is, Maya has always been comfortable with simple things, and I think that's honestly a beautiful quality. To Maya and Daniel, may you always be happy with what you have. The toast was drunk. The applause was polite. Careful. The band slipped into a transitional song, but the moment did not actually pass. Some moments don't, even when the next thing starts. They hang in the air of a room like weather. I looked at my plate. I kept my face completely still. I am my grandfather's granddaughter, and I have spent 31 years learning how to sit inside a moment of public humiliation without giving it what it needs from you. What it needs is your face, your reaction, your evidence that it landed. I gave it nothing, but I felt it, the way you feel cold water, not at the surface but through to something deeper. The dress. My $800 vintage dress that I loved and had cried over in a dressing room and was wearing on the most important day of my life. Cheap, simple, something to be pitied. On my wedding day, in front of 200 people. Daniel's hand found mine under the table and he squeezed it. Not gently, but with the specific pressure of someone who is very controlled and also very angry and choosing not to be the thing that explodes in this room. I looked up and met his eyes. I said, quietly, "I'm okay." He looked at me for a long moment. He said, "I know you are." I am going to be honest with you now about something, because I think this is important to say. When I replay this moment, and I have replayed it many, many times, I notice that what I felt was not the rage you might expect. It wasn't even primarily humiliation. It was something older and sadder than that. It was the specific grief of realizing that the hope you carried for years has finally run out of road. The hope that this time would be different, that your sister would show up, that on the one day that mattered most, she would choose to see you. She didn't. She sat back down after the toast with the expression of someone who has successfully delivered a difficult truth and feels righteous about it. I excused myself from the table after a few minutes and made the rounds of the guests, because that's what you do at your own reception. You move, you thank people, you let the love in the room have somewhere to go. Daniel walked with me for some of it. His mother pulled me aside and squeezed both my hands and said, with the precision of a woman who has seen a lot of life, "Don't let her take tonight from you. She doesn't get that." I loved her for it. I was at a table near the windows, talking to Daniel's college friends, laughing at something, genuinely present, when Priya appeared at my elbow with the particular energy that meant something had happened. "Sandra needs you," she said. "Or rather, you need to know what's happening at the bar." Sandra had found me before I could find her. She was at my side within 30 seconds, calm and professional, and with the specific expression of someone who has managed difficult situations for years and recognizes when a situation is about to become significant. She told me quietly what was happening. Brielle had approached the bar approximately 20 minutes after her speech, apparently feeling righteous and emboldened, and had told the bartending team that she wanted them to open a case of vintage champagne that she claimed my mother had specifically arranged to be brought in for the reception. The bartending team, following correct event protocol, had told her they needed to verify this with the venue manager before opening any inventory not on the event contract. Brielle had insisted. The bartender had held firm and called Sandra. Sandra had checked the event contract. There was no such arrangement. The champagne selection had been finalized by me months in advance and was fully paid for. Brielle had then escalated. In a voice loud enough to be heard by several nearby tables, she had said that she was the bride's sister, and that the bride wouldn't mind, and that if they didn't open the case, she would speak to management. And then, when the bartender again declined, she had said, "I'd like to speak to whoever owns this place. I'm sure they'll understand when I explain the situation." Sandra had come to me because she knew this moment was mine if I wanted it. I stood very still for a moment. The pavilion around me was full of warmth and light and music and 200 people who had come to celebrate something real. The band was playing. The candles were burning. The dahlias in the centerpieces were at the exact peak of their blooming. I was wearing my $800 dress, with the handmade embroidery and the wildflowers from my grandfather's garden in my hair. I was standing in the venue I had built on the land he left me, the land he had bought with a decade of double shifts because he believed in building something that was yours. I said, "Yes, I'll handle it." Daniel heard. He started to rise. I put a hand on his arm. "Give me a minute," I said. He sat back down. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has understood exactly what is about to happen and has the wisdom to let it. I walked across the reception floor. I want to describe this moment as accurately as I can because I've thought about it many times since. I was not walking fast. I was not walking with any particular drama. I was walking the way I always walk through that property, like I know every inch of it because I do. I was calm. Inside my chest, something was calm too. Not numb, not detached, but settled. The kind of settled that comes when you are finally, entirely in the right place, doing the right thing. Brielle was at the bar with a champagne flute in one hand, and the expression of someone who expects to be accommodated. She saw me coming, and her face shifted. Something calculating moved through it as she tried to read the situation. "Maya," she said. "Oh, good. Can you just tell them—" "I know," I said. "Sandra told me." "It's not a big deal. I just wanted them to open the reserve champagne, and they're being weirdly rigid about a simple request." "They're following the event contract," I said. "Well, I know, but we're family, and I figured—" She stopped. Something flickered across her face, a recognition of something she hadn't quite caught up with yet. "Wait, you said Sandra told you?" "Yes." "Why would Sandra tell you? She went to get the owner." "A beat. Just a beat." "She did," I said. The silence that followed that sentence was—I don't have words for it exactly. It was the silence of a specific kind of rearrangement. The sound of something you believed for years, turning over and showing you its underside. "What?" Brielle said. Her voice was almost nothing, barely a sound. "I own the venue, Brielle," I said. My voice was completely level, not cold. I wasn't performing coldness. I was just calm, the way Grandpa Len was always calm. "I've owned it for 5 years. Grandpa Len left me the land. All of it. The 112 acres, the farmhouse, the guest cottage, the pond. I spent 3 years and a business loan building this place on it. My name is on the deed, the business license, the LLC, every document. Sandra is my general manager. The bartending team contracted through the venue works for us. The event contract is mine." She stared at me. The champagne flute in her hand had gone still. "The property," I continued, not cruelly, just clearly, "that you called the boring old farm, that you came to 3 times your entire childhood, that I spent every summer of my life at, learning from Grandpa Len. The property he left to me because he saw something in me that he wanted to support. I built this. I named it after the creek." Her mouth opened, closed. "You've been here before," I said. "Mom and Dad's anniversary dinner 2 years ago, right at that table by the east windows. The Henderson engagement party last spring. You said the appetizers were good." She said, I knew you had the land. I didn't realize this was the same." "It's the same," I said. I looked at her for one more moment. "And I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you." I didn't feel triumphant. Not in the way I'd imagined, in some far back part of my mind that a moment like this might feel. I felt something quieter, something that was less about her and more about me. I felt complete, like a sentence that had been interrupted 31 years ago had just been finished. "My team did their job correctly," I said. "Is there anything else you need tonight?" She said nothing. I turned and walked back across the pavilion floor to my husband. I need to tell you what happened next, because the story doesn't end at the bar. What happened next was the specific and irreversible thing that happens when 200 people process information simultaneously. The guests closest to the bar had heard. Several tables nearby had heard fragments, and in the way of all things at a wedding where people are emotionally present and paying close attention and also a few drinks in, word moved through that room like water finding every available channel. Within 20 minutes, everyone knew. Not because I announced anything, not because Sandra said anything, just because there were witnesses, and because the story, the specific, perfect shape of it, was the kind of story that people cannot help telling. The quiet sister, the overlooked daughter, the grandfather who saw her, the land, the business built in secret, in patience, over years, the venue. The speech about the cheap dress, delivered by the person who didn't know. I heard fragments as the evening continued, and I moved through it. She built it herself. Left her the property, the whole property. 2-year wait list. Regional bridal guide, top 10. Daniel's mother found me near the dance floor and took my face in both her hands, which she is exactly the right height to do. We are the same height. And looked at me with something in her eyes that was not pity and not celebration, but some combination of recognition and respect that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She said, "I knew I liked you from the moment I met you. I just didn't know the full scope of it." My father found me about an hour later, near the edge of the pavilion where the windows overlook the east field. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just stood beside me and looked out at the property. The hills gone dark, and the string lights reflected in the pond, and the oak trees enormous and still against the night sky. And then he said, "He was right about you. Len was right about you all along." Something in my chest cracked open a little. "I know," I said. He put his arm around my shoulders. We stood like that for a while without speaking. Sometimes that is the best a parent can offer. I have learned, at 31, to receive it. My mother came a little later. She looked like a woman in the middle of something large and unresolved. She said, "I didn't realize, your father and we didn't understand the scale of what you'd built here." She paused. "I don't think we understood a lot of things." "Mom," I said, "it's my wedding night." She looked at me. "I know," she said. "I know. I just wanted you to know that I see it." She hugged me. It was not a perfect hug, but it was real, and for now, that was enough. Brielle left before the cake cutting. I found out afterward, from Claudette, who had monitored the situation all evening with the strategic attentiveness she brings to everything, that Brielle had gone to the parking lot and sat in her car for almost an hour. A cousin drove her home. She did not say goodbye. She did not find me. She did not wait for the cake. The cake was phenomenal, for what it's worth. Lemon and lavender. I ate 2 slices. The dancing that followed went until 11. Daniel and I had the last dance to a song we'd chosen months ago, just the 2 of us on the floor, while the guests formed a wide circle around us, and I leaned my head against his shoulder and closed my eyes and let myself be there, completely, in that moment, in that dress, on that land. In the weeks that followed, Brielle sent me a text message. I thought about whether to share it, and I decided yes, because it tells you everything about where we are and who she is, and also, honestly, because I want you to see the specific shape of an apology that contains no actual apology. I've been thinking about what happened at the wedding, and I want to say that I think people overreacted to my toast. I was being honest, and honesty is what close relationships are built on. Also, I didn't know about the venue situation, and I think it would have been respectful if I'd been told beforehand instead of finding out that way. I hope you had a good night overall. I read it twice. I put my phone face down on the counter. I made myself a cup of tea. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the backyard and breathed. Then I wrote back. 4 drafts. I wanted to say it exactly right. Brielle, I've thought about it too. What you said in your speech was unkind, and it was in front of 200 people on my wedding day. I know you've decided it wasn't a big deal, and I understand that's easier for you. But it was a big deal to me. I love you because you're my sister. When you're ready to actually talk, not to explain, but to talk, I'm here. She left it on read for 3 days and then replied with a laughing emoji and, "Okay, Maya." That is where we are, and I have had enough therapy to be at peace with where we are, even if it's not where I'd have chosen. I want to tell you one more thing before I finish. After the wedding, I received something I didn't expect. Multiple guests reached out over the following weeks to ask about my dress, where it was from, who the boutique was, what the name of the vintage shop in Charlottesville was. One of Daniel's colleagues specifically drove to Charlottesville and visited the Pearl Room, and later texted me a photo of the dress she'd found there, asking if I thought it was the one. It was not the one, but it was close, and it was beautiful. 2 photographers, we hired 2 because I'm particular, both independently told me in their follow-up emails that mine was one of the weddings they'd remember. One of them said that the dress, specifically, was the most beautiful wedding dress she'd photographed in 5 years of shooting. I am not telling you this to be petty. I promise you, I am past petty. I'm telling you this because Brielle's entire argument, the through line of her relationship to me for most of our lives, is that my choices signal a kind of insufficiency. That my quietness, my modesty, my willingness to love things that are not expensive or obvious or loud means that I am less than. That I need to be managed, guided, improved. And what actually happened is that I stood in a dress I chose with my own heart, in a venue I built with my own hands, on land that my grandfather entrusted to me specifically, next to a man who chose me, completely, clearly, without reservation. And it was not insufficient. It was not simple or sad or something to be pitied. It was everything. I've been sitting with this story for 14 months, letting it settle, trying to understand what it means beyond the drama of a single afternoon. Here is what I keep coming back to. My grandfather spent my entire childhood doing something that should have been easy, but wasn't. He saw me. He chose me. He paid attention to me when the world around me was paying attention to someone else. And he didn't do it by talking about it. He did it by showing up, consistently, quietly, over years. And then at the end, he made it permanent. He made it legal. He made it a document. And then, with that document, I built something. The thing about being the overlooked child, and I'm talking to you right now if you know this feeling, because I think a lot of you do. The thing about it is what it does over time to your own perception of yourself. You stop expecting to be chosen. You stop expecting the good thing. You get very efficient at making yourself small, at not needing too much, at managing your own disappointment before it has a chance to happen. And you call it strength, which it is, partly, but it's also loss. Grandpa Len spent my childhood trying to undo that. He didn't do it with grand speeches or dramatic gestures or anything that would have embarrassed either of us. He did it by being interested, by being present, by showing me over and over and over again in small, specific ways that what I was and how I moved through the world had value. That the quiet, watching way of being a person was not a consolation prize. It was a foundation, and I built on it. I want to be clear. I am not a billionaire. I am not a sudden secret millionaire. I am a 31-year-old woman who worked very hard for several years, took a significant financial risk, had a lot of help from a talented team, and built a small business on inherited land in rural Virginia. That's it. The story is that simple and that hard. But that evening, in the pavilion, when the guests learned the truth, I watched something shift in the room. I watched people I'd known my whole life look at me and recalibrate. Not because I'd done something dramatic or loud, because I had simply, quietly, become something they hadn't noticed. And when they noticed, they had to update everything they thought they knew. Being underestimated is uncomfortable. Being underestimated for 31 years is exhausting. But there is a very specific kind of satisfaction in the moment when the world catches up. The night after the wedding, Daniel and I stayed in the farmhouse, the same farmhouse Grandpa Len built his life around. I lay in the dark, with the window cracked, and Daniel asleep beside me, and I could hear the creak. Faint, consistent, the same creak it's always been. And I thought about Grandpa Len. I thought about a summer I was 9 years old, when he taught me the name of every bird at that pond. How we stood at the water's edge for hours with the binoculars and the field guide, and he never once rushed or seemed impatient. I thought about how he always had biscuits and coffee ready when I arrived, without being asked, because he'd noticed that I was always a little hungry and a little cold when I got there. I thought about the last time I saw him fully himself. He'd taken my hand and looked at me very directly and said, "You are going to be something, Maya Bird. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I lay in the dark on my wedding night, on his land, wearing his grandmother's ring, and I said out loud, very quietly, into the dark, "I didn't let them." The creek kept going. The dark was full of the sounds of the property settling around me. I think he heard. It's been 14 months now. Daniel and I are well. We are happy in the specific, unglamorous, daily way that real happiness works, through arguing about whose turn it is to do the dishes, and making each other coffee without being asked, and sitting side by side on the porch on Sunday mornings, not saying anything in particular. I love our life. The venue is fully booked through next year and into the one after. We're breaking ground on a new ceremony pavilion in the spring, my own design, worked out on graph paper over many evenings with Sandra's operational input and an architect friend's structural knowledge. It's going to be beautiful. Grandpa Len would have opinions about it, and most of them would be delivered quietly and would be correct. Brielle and I are cordial. We exist in the same family. We are polite at holidays. We are the specific kind of sisters who have dinner at Thanksgiving and do not talk about real things. I have stopped waiting for the apology that works. That took the most therapy of anything. My parents and I have had real conversations. Long ones, hard ones, the kind where everyone has to sit with discomfort instead of resolving it cleanly. My mother said something to me recently that I have been thinking about since. She said, "I think we saw you as the strong one, and we thought that meant you didn't need us." And I told her, kindly I hope, that needing less is not the same as not needing, and that sometimes the person who is quiet because they've learned that asking doesn't get them very far. She cried. I held her hand. We're working on it. Some things take a long time, and some things happen in an afternoon in front of 200 people and change the shape of everything that came before. If you've watched all the way to the end of this story, I want to ask you something. Not as a content thing, just person to person. Have you ever been the quiet one? The overlooked one? The one who was working and building and watching while someone louder got the attention? I know a lot of you have. I can feel it. And if you are, I want you to know that what you're building matters. Every quiet hour of it, every sacrifice nobody sees, every decision you made to keep going instead of asking for credit. It matters. And it accumulates. And one day, sometimes in the most unexpected moment, the world catches up. Drop a comment and tell me if this story hit somewhere real. Or if you've had your own moment like this, a speech, a comment, a toast at your own table that was meant to make you small. I read every comment, I really do. And if this is your first video on this channel, welcome. This is a place for the quiet ones. The ones who are always watching. The ones who are always learning. I'll see you in the next story.